Bloomberg Audio Studios.
Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
The rematch is all but set. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump have clinched their party's presidential nominations with decisive victories in a slate of low-profile primaries in Georgia, Mississippi, Washington State, and Hawaii. Bloomberg White House reporter Stephanie Lai says it's going to be a long race to the vote in November.
What's really notable is just how early it is. Now that we're just partway through March, this is much earlier than the other candidates clinched the nomination when they were in a crowded field and before they were the incumbent in the race. What it means, now that we have 8 months before the general election, is this might be the longest general election matchup in recent history. And so we should expect many, many attack ads, many rallies, and possibly even voter fatigue with just the sheer amount of back and forth and polarized messaging that we're going to see in the next 8 months.
Bloomberg's Stephanie Lai notes Trump leads Biden in 7 swing states, polled by Bloomberg News and Morning Consult. The former president has repeatedly slammed Biden's immigration policies as well as his age and memory, even as Trump has faced questions about his own mental acuity.
Well, Nathan, questions about President Biden's mental fitness took center stage with special counsel Robert Hur on Capitol Hill. He's the prosecutor who declined to charge the president over his handling of classified documents in a report that described Biden as a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory. Hur took bipartisan fire before the House Judiciary Committee from Republican Tom McClintock.
All I have to do when I'm caught taking home classified materials to say, I'm sorry, Mr. Herbert, but I'm getting old. My memory's not so great.
Yeah, Congressman,
this is the doctrine that you've established in our laws now, and it's frightening.
Congressman, my intent is certainly not to establish any sort of doctrine.
And from Democrat Adam Schiff.
You chose a general pejorative reference to the president. You understood when you made that decision, didn't you, Mr. Hur, that you would ignite a political firestorm with that language, didn't you?
Congressman, politics played no part whatsoever in my investigative steps.
Special counsel Hur says he needed to show his work when it came to deciding not to charge the president. He says he did not sanitize the explanation or disparage the president unfairly.
Staying in Washington, activity has picked up dramatically in both the House and Senate over the bill that could force China's ByteDance to sell TikTok. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has more.
A vote is scheduled for the House today and is expected to get the two-thirds majority vote needed. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Bloomberg says they are not attempting to ban TikTok.
We want TikTok to exist. We're not there to ban it. I've said we want to make it tic-tac-toe. We want to make it something that is not a fearful social media platform, but one that is very positive. And in order to do that, we have to see the divesting of it from the Chinese government.
Now, TikTok CEO Shou Chew has been on Capitol Hill to talk with senators. Vote there is expected to be much tighter. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Ed, thanks. Well, turning to geopolitics, a warning from the president of Poland. In an interview with Bloomberg's Joe Matthew and Kayleigh Lines, Andrzej Duda said Vladimir Putin would attack other states if Russia wins its war in Ukraine. Here's President Duda speaking through an interpreter.
We are the nation who was enslaved by Russia several times. If Russia wins the war in Ukraine, if Putin wins the war in Ukraine, he will attack one more time. He will attack other states because this is Russian imperialism reborn, and it is greedy. It will be willing to attack further. That is why it has to be stopped. It has to be blocked, and it has to be punished. And this is the most important task that is facing the community of the West today. And this community is led by the United States of America.
And Polish President Andrzej Duda's warning lands at a critical moment in the war, with allies scrambling to provide Ukraine with more military assistance. For the extended conversation, head over to the Bloomberg Talks podcast feed. Find it on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Well, now let's turn to the markets, Karen. Stocks begin the day once again in record territory. The S&P 500 rose more than 1% yesterday, as the latest inflation figures did little to alter bets that the Federal Reserve will cut rates this year. Morgan Stanley equity strategist Mike Wilson, though, remains cautious.
People are reaching for risk because, there's FOMO. We don't see the justification for higher multiples, given that we have basically no earnings growth across the broader economy. a situation that's still kind of a difficult operating environment. And so we're going to be very selective. And that's why we think it's, you got to be a stock picker here. You can't just buy the index.
Morgan Stanley's Mike Wilson is sticking with his year-end target of 4,500 for the S&P 500. That's about 13% below current levels.
From markets to the economy now, Nathan. We are officially 1 week away from the Fed's next policy meeting, and another Wall Street titan is speaking out on the direction of interest rates. We get the latest from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John.
And Karen, Ken Griffin says the Fed should move slowly in lowering rates so they don't have to reverse course later. The founder of the hedge fund empire Citadel telling the Futures Industry Association pausing and then changing direction back toward higher rates quickly would be the most devastating course of action to pursue. Well, he thinks the Fed will be slower than people are expecting for that very reason. Fed Chair Jay Powell last week suggested the central bank is getting close to the confidence it needs to start lowering interest rates, and investors are still pricing a June rate cut. That's even after yesterday's hotter than expected CPI. Griffin also said Citadel's participation in this month's rescue of New York Community Bank was the right price. John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. Over in Europe, the UK economy's rebounded after slipping into a recession. Gross domestic product rose 0.2% in January. That followed a 0.1% decline in December. Services and construction delivered the gains, offsetting a drop in industrial production.
Well, in Asia, Nathan, Bloomberg News has learned Chinese developer Country Garden Holdings has missed a coupon payment on a yuan bond for the first time. Country Garden's crisis entered a new chapter after a Hong Kong court received a creditor's petition last month to wind up the company.
In company news, Karen, Bloomberg News has learned the Pentagon's pulled out of a plan to spend billions on a chip grant to Intel. We get the story from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
The funding was part of a spending package signed into law over the weekend by the president. It allocated $3.5 billion for Intel to produce advanced defense and intelligence-related semiconductors. But we're told the Pentagon is pulling as much as $2.5 billion. So the onus is on the Commerce Department to make up for that billion-dollar shortfall through the CHIPS Act. Lawmakers have directed Commerce to do so, and it could mean a greater share of Intel's funds from the CHIPS Act are devoted to military uses rather than commercial ones. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
Okay, Doug, thanks. And checking shares of Intel right now, they're down more than 1% in early trading.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. For that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. President Vladimir Putin says that Russia is ready to use nuclear weapons if there is a threat to Russian statehood, sovereignty, or independence. Speaking with Russian state television today, Putin said he hoped that the U.S. would avoid any escalation that could trigger a nuclear war, but emphasized that Russia's nuclear forces are ready for it. Asked if he has ever considered using battlefield nuclear weapons in Ukraine, Putin responded that there has been no need for that. Meanwhile, the Pentagon says that it has found $300 million in cost that will now be used to meet Ukraine's immediate air defense artillery and anti-tank needs. Defense Department spokesperson Major General Pat Ryder.
It will give them some much-needed capability that will likely last in the weeks time frame, but nowhere even close to what they need to be able to continue to sustain this fight.
Major General Ryder says longer-range missiles are included in the aid package. The U.S. Army's 7th Transportation Brigade has been deployed following President Biden's orders to send troops to create an offshore aid port for Gaza. Their mission to build a giant floating pier off the coast of Gaza where aid and supplies will come before a civilian ship takes it ashore to help Palestinian civilians. Brigadier General Brad Henson.
Which is really just pontoons that are like Legos. They all fit together. So we'll have this roll-on discharge facility that's approximately 2 to 3 miles off of the erected pier.
General Henson says this is strictly a humanitarian mission, and there will be no U.S. soldiers on the ground. The Transport Workers Union is pushing back on Governor Kathy Hochul's plan to fight crime in the New York City subway system. The Transport Workers Union says it simply falls short of providing a sustainable long-term solution. The governor's plan includes using the National Guard and random bag checks. State troopers as well as police are also being used to fight crime. TWU Local 100 President Richard Davis also had strong words for the CEO of the MTA.
Jan Oliva is not working. To me, he's not working with integrity or concern about our members, our TW members, and the riding public.
Audio courtesy of ABC 7. While President Biden and former President Trump have clinched the nominations to represent their parties in November's election, there is a third candidate that could play the role of spoiler. Independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. could influence the election. There's word NFL quarterback Aaron Rodgers is on Kennedy's short list of potential running mates. Global news 24 hours a day, whenever you want it, with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael, thank you. Time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. For that, we bring in John Stashauer. John, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Knicks and Sixers at the Garden, just as it was 48 hours earlier in that one. Philly won 79-73. The Sixers again scored 79. This time the Knicks scored 33 more than they did on Sunday. They won by 27. Welcome back OG Anunoby. Out since January, he scored 14 points. Jalen Brunson and Josh Hart both had 20. Hart had a triple-double. Knicks now hit the road. 4-game trip starts tomorrow in Portland. Minnesota got 37 from Anthony Edwards in a win over the Clippers. The Timberwolves, Nuggets, and Thunder all with 45 wins atop the West. The Celtics with their league-leading 51st win, 123-107 at Utah. Rangers and Hurricanes in Raleigh scoreless late first period.
Pesci leans on him to the near corner with 15 to go. Centering pass to Banachak. Gets it back to Lindgren. Looking for a deflection in front. It goes off a skate. Sharp angle shot by Fox. He scores!
ESPN New York calling only goal. Rangers won 1-0. A second straight shutout for Igor Shesterkin. First place Rangers have won 13 of the last 16. They're now 6 points ahead of second place Carolina. Rangers were without their rookie enforcer Matt Rempe, suspended 4 games for his hit of the Devils. Jonas Siegenthaler, the 6'7" Rempe, has quickly become a fan favorite, spending more time in the penalty box than on the ice. College basketball championship week, and they are celebrating on Staten Island. The Wagner Seahawks with an upset win at the Northeast Conference tourney. They'll take a 16-15 record to the NCAA tournament. Yankees not saying much about the Garrett Cole elbow injury, other than he needs more tests and is unlikely to pitch the season opener 2 weeks from tomorrow in Houston. More NFL free agent signings like Derrick Henry by Baltimore, and the Giants have added a backup quarterback, signing Drew Lock, formerly with Seattle and Denver. John Stashauer, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Okay, John, thank you. Well, it may be months away till the conventions, not to mention the November election, but the 2024 rematch is all but set now. Both President Biden and former President Trump clinched their party's nominations following last night's primary results. And for more, we are joined by Bloomberg News senior editor Bill Ferries. You know, Bill, it's amazing to think about the fact that the polls say this is the rematch that most voters don't want, but the voters certainly sealed it early.
Yeah, buckle up. It's going to be quite a long election season, Nathan. We've almost never had an outside candidate like former President Trump seal the nomination so quickly. It's, of course, not a surprise that the president, as the incumbent, did so. But this is now this race is now official, and it comes, I think, let's see, I'll do the math, almost 8 months before Election Day, and so that means, especially if you're in one of these battleground states, you've got 8 months of intense lobbying and commercials coming your way. And it's going to be, not surprisingly, probably a very nasty fight. And as you said, it's the fight that voters in surveys for almost a year now have said they didn't want to see, a rematch they didn't want. But then they defaulted to those choices when they went into the primaries voting booth. So it's maybe not what they wanted to see, but it's in some weird ways, it's what they've asked for.
Well, it says something about how this process is decided. You have base voters going into primary elections. It raises the question about what general election voters are going to do when we have this long slog into November, raising the question about whether we're going to see voter fatigue along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's always been the most motivated, hardcore voters in both parties who turn out for these primaries. And, when you look at on the Republican side, you did see, interestingly, a fairly notable percentage of voters who went for Nikki Haley there at the end, anywhere from about 20% to 40% in some of those primaries we saw from South Carolina, Haley's home state, and including the Super Tuesday states last week. So there is definitely a swath even of the people who vote in the primaries who had some second thoughts about Donald Trump, and that's going to be a big question mark hanging over the Republican side of this campaign. Is where do those voters go? Do they get back in the fold and go with their nominee, Trump? Do they stay home on Election Day, or do they turn around and go for Biden? It depends on how strongly they felt about Trump in the end. And we just don't know. And that's going to be a lot of attention is going to be focused on those voters going forward. And on the Democratic side, you have a lot of Democrats themselves who say they're concerned about the president's age. And will they rally themselves to show up in November, or will they stay home, or will they will people on both sides look for one of these for a third-party candidate like Robert Kennedy? And it's a big X mark in terms of how he could affect the campaign if that keeps going.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.